thank you to everyone for joining, and of course, thank you to Urbanism Next for having us. We're delighted to be here. Amazing conversation so far, and so we hope this adds to it. Our discussion today is called Streets for People. It is going to be myself, Simon, and Jerome Unterreiner from ZGF, principal and urban designer, and Alessandra Galletti from Project for Public Spaces. I feel very fortunate for knowing both these amazing individuals, and we have ongoing conversations and work together that revolve around these issues that we'll be talking about today. I think, you know, for us, we're kind of brought together and wanted to have this conversation with you all today because, you know, there's been so many radical and quick changes over the last year, and we anticipate more, not necessarily the same ones, but more changes that will, of course, be reshaping our cities at every scale, from the scale of the neighborhood to the scale of the building lobby. And so, you know, that's essentially what our talk will be about, is the diversity of scales at which change can happen, the diversity of timelines at which change might happen, and with no promises about any, you know, recipes for success, but more questions that have come up for us as we think about this. And I think there's obviously immense potential for reconsidering every ingredient or every element on the ground plane and how they can combine together to kind of reform our urban environments. So, you know, that's how we've kind of organized this. And I think, you know, particular to, of course, this year, but looking ahead, you know, moments of crisis and change, whether it's climatic or technological or even medical, offer those opportunities to reimagine our shared spaces, our streets, our parks, and the interfaces between inside and outside. And I think for us, you know, one of the guiding questions has been, you know, in those moments and afterwards, how can we kind of hold on to those lessons and carry them forward, and how can we kind of holistically reimagine those shared spaces and employ technology and human-centered design to dignify and enrich the lives of users. So I'll just introduce, you know, myself and my own firm very quickly. I'm Simon David. I'm the founder of OSD Outside. We are landscape architects who also work in the urban realm. We also have architects on staff. So, you know, we're very interested in landscape architecture first and foremost, you know, as a way of asking questions about how can ecology and social space be activated. And we work in parks, but also cities and also, you know, rooftops too. And so, you know, one of our clients is Union Square Park. And of course, you may have seen some recent work they've been doing around reshaping streetscapes. Part of our overlap with Project Public Spaces is kind of how we adapt some of these kind of streetscapes. And of course, you know, they have a long legacy of, you know, remaking New York City streetscapes. We also just think about infrastructure generally and how it can be humanized and how it can be integrated with the city. So this is one of our clients, Gotham Greens, and we've sort of reconsidered how, you know, a farm can be flipped on its head so that the outside becomes a place for social life in a way that enriches ecology and adds, you know, social space and expanded kind of network for connectivity and integrates with the city in ways that maybe just purely engineered infrastructure might not. And then, you know, in the last year or so, we've been doing a lot of work in cities of various scales and just thinking about how, again, you know, urban renewal projects can be amended with light, quick, and cheap interventions. So this is in Eastern Pennsylvania, a very walkable city that sort of needs to be reconnected to its waterfront. So that, you know, that's generally where we're coming from. And I'll hand it over to Alessandra to talk about PPS.
Yes, good morning. I'm really excited to share our experience at the New York City Flatiron and NoMad district with you. And that's what we will talk about with Simon later. But first, I would like to introduce myself and introduce Project for Public Spaces. I'm a landscape architect and I practiced for a number of years before joining Project for Public Spaces. And placemaking captured my passion for people and places. And at the time when I joined PPS, you know, architects, designers, and clients were more interested in the expression of design as objects than the human experience. And that is fortunately changed very much. And it's a pleasure to see, you know, the changes. So next slide. A little bit about Project for Public Spaces. We are pioneers in the changes that you see happening all around the world. We are planning and programming and design nonprofit organization, and we help people strengthening their communities through public space. Founded in 1975, Project for Public Spaces has brought some of the most successful public spaces in the world to life. In the next slide, please. Our work is based on the work of Holly White, as you all know, all of you know probably, is the brilliant urban planner that in the 60s to the 60s to the 80s was observing human behavior in cities and advocating for small sociable places. Fred Kent, the founder of Project for Public Spaces, was a student and later on collaborator. So during a time where the modernist architecture was creating these big empty plazas or buildings sitting in empty lots, his work was really, important, as well as Jane Jacobs, focusing on how the social and cultural importance of neighborhoods and public spaces, including streets. Next slides. It shows that Holly White had a set of important basics for successful public space. So put food, a place to sit, water, sun, shade, triangulation, and places to people watch, and programming. Placemaking, everything is based for us on placemaking. Is a collaborative process that brings people together to create the great public spaces at the heart of their communities. It results in vibrant public spaces that contribute to health, happiness, and generally well-being. Next. The next slide. Oh, that's a slow one. So it's hard to, one of the, say of William White was, it's hard to create places that are not successful, but, how often is made still nowadays. What attracts people is also is other people. And this is Times Square, where we worked 10 years ago, and from a thoroughfare with a lot of traffic. Now the traffic has been reduced very much, and we have places for people. So I would like to show another few examples of our work. So the next slide will show also the Times Square and how it evolved from us doing observations, not only time lapse that this guy was doing that, but also on the ground. So we went from a very lighter, quicker, cheaper experiment to the Snoetta design, just recently, and that is the process. So we help the public spaces become, very successful and community oriented. The next slide shows also another project that we work that is very well known, that is Bryant Park. And in the 80s, just with observations and people mapping, we understood how the place was. I was not working there at the time, but we understood how the park was used, and with few changes, started the big change that is bringing people in and completely changing not only the park but the area in the surroundings. So the next slide is showing another. It is showing another project that we worked on. This soldier and monument. That monument you see there on the right used to be in a traffic circle, and so little by little with the city we close the traffic, so the traffic is around, and this is becoming one of the most successful places still in Detroit, and it helped the city moving to the next level of public spaces. So the next slide is, so we believe that public spaces streets are public spaces. They are formed by four main characteristics. So with these four characteristics, you are sure that the public space is going to be successful. Sociability, users activities, comfort and image, and access and linkages. So when you take care of this, it is a very good rule to, have a good, sound public space. So the next slide, it shows, what we think, our approach for streets. We treat streets as places, and these are some of the principles that we believe are very, very important to make the streets. And we try to do this with Simon in the Flatiron district in New York City. One important thing is overarching lens, designed for equity, because that's the street is the place where we, can be really inclusive, and a place for, it can become a place for everybody. Next slide, it shows some of the examples, flexibility, create great destinations and activation, it provide places for lingering, is not that you need to, in the past you say, do not stop here. We say, please stop here. And then, the little girl there is on a plaza in New York City that we, as an organization, we start, we contributed to start this program of plazas around the city. So the next slide is something I am showing as a introduction to what Simon will show next. That is the Flatiron District project. And so the pandemic shook our world of what we knew, and also made us understand firsthand how important public spaces are. The pandemic changed the streets in our cities, making them more lively and active, because we are there, out there, because we cannot go in the many places, but also showed people initiative, the creativity, and the will of cities to help streamlining the process. So these are the few positive elements of the pandemic, unfortunately. So we have the opportunity here to reimagine our public space, not only for now, for the short term and the recovery, but and the reopening, but the long term, what can we take from our experience. So the next slides are showing very quickly, what people are doing in the streets, especially in New York. The streets are the place where we can express our, unhappiness about certain subjects like Black Lives Matter and inequality. And so it's very important to be able to do that. So this is a store, temporary store. So rather than closing, people decided to move out, and it's been done by Better Block in Dallas. And then this is a street in Brooklyn. And if you were showing this picture 20 years ago, you say, oh, that look like some kind of European country. But no, this is Brooklyn now. So it's really amazing. So I'm very, very happy. Now, I think Simon is going to talk about the Flatiron District in New York City and our project. You're muted.
Classic. Thanks, Alessandra. There was I think a perfect kind of segue to this section of the presentation. I think a lot of the ideas that you touched on sort of were baked into a lot of this thinking. So what we're about to share was a collaboration between us and Project Public Spaces. This is really a visioning project. We were engaged by the Flatiron and 23rd Street partnership before New York really reopened. And so at that point in time, and this was just before the summer began in 2020, there was obviously a lot of uncertainty about what this would mean for us, what it would mean for our businesses, what it would mean for daily life. And of course, in a place like New York City, that's an incredibly jarring experience, when it's so full of hustle and bustle. So we developed this vision that would help them can sort of guide the transformation, the adaptation of streetscapes, whether it be for a week, a day, or longer. And so, um, this is, of course, the district. You guys probably know it pretty well, if not in person, then in movies. It just so happens that all three of us in this presentation are in the neighborhood. So ZGF is right there. We're just down the road on West Broadway in Tribeca, and PPS is on Broadway, as they should be. So this is I think this is the images of what make Flatiron famous. It's has this sort of icon of the adaptation of streetscapes. This is the Flatiron Plaza. It's gone from major intersection to a place where people hang out. Madison Square Park is one of the great parks in New York City, where you have the joy of standing in line for an hour and a half for a hamburger, or just enjoying the lawn. There's a really robust arts program that partners with arts initiatives and architecture and design, like Van Allen Institute. But of course, we were there at a time like this, where all these stores and all that vitality was on pause without any clear idea of what it would be like to reopen. So, this is familiar to all of us by now. So our charge was this: how do we bring the life of the inside out, and how do we maintain the essential operations of the street while giving over as much of the rest of the street to other activities? And for us, it meant a deep dive into different um, organizations and what their parameters were for this from a health and safety perspective. At the same time, this is New York City, so there was a kind of free for all and a kind of claim the land if you can kind of approach to adapting sidewalks. So here you see the early days of the pandemic when nobody thought that a mask was necessary, but what I think became really important for us was and the client was not just to think about outdoor dining, which of course was a huge focus and an important social aspect, but how could every ground floor business have a chance to kind of make its way outside? And so we took stock of all the kind of components of what makes them function. And on the left side here, we've kind of simply diagrammed what their life was like pre-COVID internally, and how that kind of operation could be extended outside. And so this is trying to account for every kind of business, not just dining. We mapped the district. It's about 110 acres of New York City, which is no small thing. That's about 4,500 businesses and 21 million square feet of office. So definitely a much loved and much used place. What you're noticing here on the screen is that those things that really bring people together, like fast casual restaurants, cafes and bars, really cluster around the transit hotspots. So that's where these subways are coming up. On the east side of the district, there's a much higher percentage of commercial office space. Some of these really grand old 19th and 20s and 30s buildings, but they don't offer much in the way of vitality on the ground floor. And you can really notice that just in a regular year, it's quite dead, so to speak. And you can see here kind of a snapshot of what that looks like. Whereas on the west side, it's that kind of classic, kind of village feel almost of New York City, where there's a lot of human scaled storefronts, stoops, things which really kind of bring people out and excite people to interact. We also looked at the diversity of street types for everything from the widest avenues to the major east-west of 23rd Street, which has the select bus service, Broadway, which has its own initiatives being adapted during the pandemic, and then the smaller east-west streets. For us, it was really important just to understand how people were using the streets as the city began to reopen, and to try to harness some of that creativity and give it some form as a kind of overall plan. So we went out there as a whole team, PPS and OSD, and went to town with just trying to understand. And these are sort of images of classic New York. Is why we love it. People try to make things work in the worst of circumstances with trash right next to them and billboards and construction. But early on, people were getting a pretty good idea of how to make these things kind of work. Challenges with trying to fit a lot of people waiting. This is Trader Joe's, and so how could these kinds of moments be enhanced, improved, made easier, and not only that, but maybe even enjoyable. Not that kind of sense of dread that I think we probably still feel and definitely felt back then. So I'll hand it back to Alessandra, because this is something that we did together, and PPS was really leading the charge on some of this stuff.
Yeah, so as Simon mentioned, we did most of the observations and the survey and interviews, and so this is showing the park that is really the core of this district. Madison Square Park is a very is historic and very well attended on a normal basis. They have events. They have an amazing art display, and during the pandemic and still now, has served as an outdoor space that help really very much the community and New York as a whole. So these are current conditions of one of the avenues where there is more commercial, more office activities on the east side. And it's amazing how, the park on the west side is much more open and it's influencing the neighborhood. And on this side and on the north side is much more closed because Madison doesn't have that much, ground level uses. So the next slide, it shows also this is the north side, and there is only one entrance at each end of the street. And that's how people that don't feel comfortable going into the park because either they have the bicycle, they are messengers, or even elderly people, you see them, being on the outside. And so that's an observation that we did. So how to integrate the park, or actually how to bring the park out. So the next slide is actually showing something that we did propose, that is, creating a more organized, and actually Simon did an amazing rendering that you will see at the end, but this is a more organized Madison Street and 26th Street that is, we wanted to kind of create a bike lane, but also organize all these bus stops, because this part and the north part is where the commuter buses are, stopping, but they are not really very organized. So the next slide. So now I have a few slides that showed which kind of questions and which kind of survey activities we did. It's very interesting that when asked, I don't know if this is too small to read, but which kind of configuration would you invest? This was a survey mostly with the retailers. Which kind of configuration we invest in for a temporary outdoor operation, possibly July, October. They responded that they will not use like an architect or have a structure. And now it's completely different, because if you go in the area, they are the most beautiful outdoor displays. So at that time, people didn't know yet. So these are kind of questions that we ask. Also, from the interviews, the voice of the community, is very interesting what they said about their, struggles at the point. So there are a lot of universities on this side, on the east side. So staging areas for students. At the time, they didn't know that, schools were not going back, but staging area or closing streets. So this 28th Street is what people wanted, but the city actually ended up closing Broadway, that is not as well used. So this survey could have been used, more by the city to, to do what was going to be useful. Broadway is actually very nice now, but it's not as. So these are, statements from the focus group meeting, again, at this point, they are a little bit outdated because things evolved, but there were a lot of concerns about how to continue, to survive on outside. So the next. So also these are few slides with observations about ridership. So of course, subway rides, they were really minimized. And a little bit more successful was the bus ridership, also because going in that area, there are a lot of buses coming from outside. So they were like express buses, and maybe people felt more comfortable using that rather than the subway. And of course, this whole area and the whole New York City and many other cities, they have much less traffic. As you see in the next slide, it shows at least is down 35 to 50% compared to 2019. So the next slides are showing pedestrian activity during June 2020, and the next slide is going to show where the comparison between the June 19 and June 2020. And as Simon was saying before, the lower left corner of the park is where the subways are. So there is, of course, more concentration in both years, 2019 and 2020. But the rest is much, much more light because people were not going to work, and the retail was reduced a lot at the time.
I'll just jump in quickly, just to reiterate. Alessandra, I think that for us as a team, that was one of the critical things about understanding the way that the site was being used. First and foremost, this brought up issues of equity. Who was actually going into the district at this time? There were people who had the privilege of not coming to work, and there were people who did not have that privilege. So knowing that people were using the bus because that's where the outer boroughs were getting their access to the district meant that we wanted to provide some kind of comfort, dignity, safety for bus riders. Knowing that there were homeless people who are using this area, how could we think about those north and east streets that you were talking about, Alessandra, to make sure that that was a place that felt like a home for them? And then looking at the pedestrian data, we had to respond in a very unlikely circumstance, of course, or the district was. And so this was harnessing millions of points of anonymous data and processing it through GIS to visualize on an hour by hour basis where people were gathering. And so this is, we put together a whole movie showing the kind of lifeblood essentially of the district and how it compared year over year. And as you were saying, Alessandra, what became clear was those places that were popular during regular times were popular still. Places that were close to transit, places that where other people were going to be, and certainly the park. And so this just quickly kind of brings it to life. We were trying to understand if there was really any significant change too as the city was reopening, but as you can see, it was a pretty sustained depreciation. So, I think that, as Alessandra was saying, like from the engagement, we learned a lot. People who had lived and worked there from at a time, even when the district was not the sort of thriving center of commerce that we all know it to be now. Great quotes. And one of them I think was really, really meaningful to us. And I'll just read it to everybody because I think it's worthwhile. This is from one of the business owners. The area is like a valley with its own ecosystem, and the park is a beautiful lung for us. An opportunity is here to expand the park as much as possible with trees, planters, all that, and give people a feeling of transformation when they're coming into this neighborhood to be lifted up. I think we can do something spectacular. Nature takes your stress level down, and why not tell people that NoMad is where we add value to you and not take value out of you? And we love that. I mean, of course, we wanted to solve some of the problems about social distancing, and we were well on the way with some ideas. But this really kind of galvanized this idea that we should take advantage of one of the critical assets of New York City and build upon it. It was a way of solving some problems, but it was more so a way of creating the kind of joy and stress relief that I think everybody was yearning for at that time. And so it kind of identified for us, a few key guiding principles. Of course, health and safety for the pandemic, but of course, even though car traffic was down, there was an increase in accidents. We wanted to provide equitable access, as Alessandra mentioned, with bus ridership for frontline workers and people who didn't have the privilege of not coming to work, comfort, enjoyment even, and bring in a sense of identity that this should be done in a way that wasn't generic, but maybe it could elevate the kind of qualities of the Flatiron NoMad district and use art, for instance, or use park as part of the the approach. So we developed a very simple kit of parts, things which could be implemented in a moment's notice, essentially, tables, chairs, furniture, rolling planters, even games, or even thinking about lighting for nighttime that didn't rely on wiring, but could be solar powered or battery powered, and then perhaps graphics as well. And I think at the time this felt so revolutionary to us, like, wow, we've come up with this amazing idea of creating a grid of 6-foot dots or something. But we wanted to come up with really simple, easy to implement ways of helping businesses organize their furniture, helping DOT set up and take down planters. And so we've kind of used this universal 6-foot grid that could maybe use the kind of standard painting that DOT uses. And this could be a way to organize streets, whether it's for outdoor dining or for maybe larger kind of outdoor activity or bike storage or what have you. So with all those things in mind, we went back to the district as a whole. So here you see an axon of the overall district. 6th Avenue is to the left on the west. Park Avenue South is to the east on the right. And of course, Madison Square Park is in the middle, and you can see the transit stops. There's over 21 acres of roadbed of this 110 acres. So obviously, no surprise to the audience, the significant amount of space it's taking up. So we mapped each and every lane. We also identified where the kind of bus routes and bus stops were, and used that as a guidepost for how to work around them. So we want to preserve all the bus lanes, preserve all the bus stops, but work around them and consider any of the rest of the roadbed could be used or adapted. The PATH station, which goes to New Jersey, and then all the local subway stops, you can see kind of anchor the outside of the district. They're kind of a walk from each other and a little bit of a walk from the park, but they're a reason for people to walk from one place to the next in the neighborhood. During the pandemic, the city had put in place, even early on, the opening up of Broadway. And so there was this existing kind of north-south extension of Madison Square Park into the district, which, set in motion some nice things. It wasn't as successful, I think, as some people had anticipated. At the same time, the city was rolling out initiatives like open streets and open dining, and local businesses were using that to lobby for open streets, and some of these were being put into place. So one of them was on 22nd Street. There was an open street that was opened up. Another was a segment of 28th Street. There were open segments on a number of outdoor dining on 24th, 25th, and 26th Street. But they didn't really share a relationship to each other. They weren't connected to each other. And for that reason, there were sort of anecdotes about how people, drivers would get annoyed and take down the NYPD police barriers and just drive through. So there was a good intent that was maybe struggling at this early stage to gain success. And then, I think you can see here that, essentially, the heart of the district was the park. That again was the sort of the key to the lifeblood of Madison and NoMad. With the amount of roadway that we had on offer, up to 21 acres, which was 3.5 times the size of Madison Square Park, we thought, well, traffic is already down by 50%. Why didn't we take a portion of that roadbed and imagine doubling the area of the park, giving that much more space to people, but arrange it maybe in a way that creates an uninterrupted network, using the city's initiatives of open streets and outdoor dining to build upon the park and to build upon the existing open street of Broadway, and to make connections between transit stops and tying together the entire district. And so this is how we sort of proposed to do it. On the one hand, keeping all the bus routes and bus stops, extending the park to the north to 26th Street. So building upon that asset, doing the same thing to the east along Madison Avenue. We test fitted, layouts for different kinds of outdoor dining and outdoor working. So this could become a place for obviously eating morning, lunch, and dinner, but also a place that could be outdoor work, and propose some very simple elements, things that we're all pretty familiar with. And this is what, again, it looks like, or it looked like over a year ago. And this was what we proposed to do to adapt it. So simple bollards that would dedicate the bike lane and reclaiming 2 of the car lanes, keeping open the fire lane and the bus lane, and providing some sort of temporary shelter This is a section of what it used to be like. This is adapting it in a kind of temporary fashion. So again, keeping the kind of critical lanes open, but expanding the kind of feel of the park. One of the things that was really interesting to learn was there are some other initiatives in the longer term that the city has in mind. The taking down perimeter fences and opening up the park so it feels more like a part of the city, and addressing drainage along some of the curbs. And so we imagine, like, in the long term, if we establish this kind of relationship with the sidewalk and with the street, can't we make it easier, kind of grease the wheels for incorporating some of these kind of future initiatives for the city, like Parks Without Borders, and really making the park bleed into the city? And that was the approach we took with the rest of the project too. So using streets to the east for kind of large scale either storage or kind of outdoor events, really expanding the park to the west in the form of kind of these outdoor dining streets. Thinking about how these kind of smaller scale streets, which currently a little bit barren, overwhelmed by scaffolding and parking, could become something more like this. And then thinking about how streets can tie together transit, and then at the scale of the business, proposing different adaptations of the curb, so that again, it's not just about outdoor dining, but everything from providing e-bike parking to drop off at hotels, to the extent that that actually still happens, outdoor containers, whether they be for storage of furniture and games, or if it's for a kind of temporary kind of taco truck type thing. And so it kind of offers at the same time this diversity of kind of curbside use that works with the overall district plan. And then this is on 6th Avenue, a highly trafficked area. Could that also be a way to extend the sidewalk and reinforce the kind of safety while offering more kind of seating? So this was all done again relatively early in the pandemic. This is a vision that we created in tandem with our client and with PPS. It was supposed to sort of help spur some ideas for adapting these streetscapes. And for us, it's really opened up a lot of questions about how these kinds of initiatives can grow in the future, how these temporary things can become maybe more permanent. But no doubt, everybody would agree, this is an extremely unusual opportunity to reconsider, an extensive part of New York, and in spite of all the sadness of the last year, we do think that this is one of the great silver linings. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jerome. And
Thanks, Simon. Just a little bit about what I do. I'm a planner and urban designer with ZGF Architects. We're a design firm that has a pretty diverse portfolio of healthcare research facilities, academic buildings, mixed use, corporate campuses, museums, transportation facilities, and eco districts. And we're about just a little over 700 with offices in Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, DC, New York City, and Vancouver, BC. And Simon and I have been talking on and off for the past several years. And what's interesting now is that unfortunately with this pandemic, it has pushed us to look at a lot of really important things, like social equities and more community-based fair outcomes. Also an expectation that we want to spend more time outdoors, and that the streets maybe need to be prioritized for people over cars. We've done a lot of district work. I still am doing district work. We've done smart city work in Japan. And the interesting nexus of being an architect working in urban design is the understanding that the public realm permeates both the building and the street. So before I run through this really quick, just to set up some thoughts, as this is just a visual, it's not a design for anything. We are working hard to accelerate designs with cities in terms of how the right-of-way might change, but obviously we're in the midst of this kind of wild west as new mobility is coming on, and sometimes the best that we can do is curbless environments and just start preparing a little bit with the community, some rules that we might be able to break and some things that we may be able to address earlier as the technology emerges and we figure it all out. We also know that I think earlier this morning or yesterday, Warren Logan from the city of Oakland was talking about, what's the difference between a pilot or feeling like a phased implementation. We're definitely, the nice thing about pilots is it's an opportunity to kick the sort of kick the tires, take a look at what's, what might be possible and go from there. And so that's a really good thing. The other thing is that we find that there may be more ability to do this on local urban non-arterial streets. So we understand that this is, the potential for first and last mile is a lot of potential for some more rapid change that we build on we reinforce the existing public transit and investments that are already made. This is where AV could be really special. There was an article yesterday in the New York Times on buses called "The Holy Grail of Transportation." It's awesome. I'm a bus rider. I'm got a 17-year-old. My wife and I are renters, intentional renters. We're not homeowners, and we've relied on public transportation, walking in our bikes for most of our lives, and it's been amazing, and we love it. We see some opportunities with that, and then finally, this can be thought of both urban and suburban. Ellen Dunham Jones was talking earlier this morning, and really, looking at the promise of the suburban environments, and quite frankly, a lot of folks that can't afford the city, that have jobs in the city, commute in from the suburbs, or how can we densify the suburbs to manage our growth so that we don't eat up more land. Next. Yeah. Oh, okay. So before this all started, I mean, there was already the notion that the outdoor environments, all of our chronic diseases and a lot of things that we're addressing are kind of in the form of curing diseases, where 90% of our money was going. And frankly, the prevention of diseases or chronic illnesses really are in the environment and our broader lifestyle. And so we're already starting to see the focus move back into where we live, how we grow up, and those forces that make us healthy. We also know that building for machines, single occupancy vehicles, and all the accoutrements that come with it are tough for us. And so as we look into this emerging mobility, particularly EV, but more importantly, group rapid transport, and still thinking about group transit with walking and biking on the front end, there's a lot of things that might be able to change in our environments that we don't have to work with anymore, that may be able to create a better focus on creating environments for the human senses, a real sense of place that speak to us and on our health through our senses, and then maybe the opportunity to reposition the whole idea of what the street is. Next. One of the biggest promises for AV in certain spots will be that once we take the steering wheel out, and I know AVs, it's still not a trusted thing, but once we get there, just like the cell phones, we take we have this safe proposition, and when we do that, all of a sudden the whole street becomes a lot safer, and maybe the ability to cross the street other than intersections may offer some more opportunities for building connectivity. You can go next, Simon. And so, when we started talking about this, and we've done this with Werner, I mean, there's Werners and there's already these kinds of environments, but in the larger American grid and the way that we built rapidly versus the European model, how we go back and start finding those smaller wins. And it may have to do with the ability, with the mobility, with what we have now, being able to actually connect across the street without the fear of wayfinding and everything that comes along with human drivers, and at the same time, being able to really look at a much more greater mix of work, live, build density, so that we can create affordability both in suburban and urban environments to create a broader transect of all of us that will be living together and next to one another next. And so we've already went through a huge transformation with the automobile, and even during this big transformation, you know, this is when we first started herding people to intersections. It created a whole different behavior on the street. We had, you know, we had center lines, we had the traffic signal, we had stop signs, and all of a sudden the street really became about movement. And even one of the Detroit City Council member, Alderman Sherman Littlefield at the time, was saying, you know, we're dogging people enough as it is. Let's not try to herd them to the intersections. I think one of the other interesting aspects is when, before those other things came along in Detroit, 1/4 of the Detroit Police Department was actually in traffic management. And I want to come back to that at another point in an AV future next. So I'm going to read one quote, and it's the top one. It's from Janet Sadik Khan, and the NACTO AV blueprint for NACTO blueprint for AV urbanism is starting to show some really awesome promise in terms of where we're headed. But she says the most sustainable cities aren't going to be the ones that have the smartest tech or roads made of plastic instead of asphalt. They're going to be the ones where you don't need a car in the first place. When you solve for active transportation like biking and walking, you solve for other things like local economies and closer communities and public safety. And what you know, the big promise there is maybe we can detach from the grid a little bit, and we can start to move across between the building communities, because everything that we do in the building communities are reflective of the diversity and the equity in the public realm. And so rather than, you know, being cooped up and then scooting along the edges of buildings to get to an intersection, there may be some opportunities where we really start to share both the public and private, the crafting of these places where, you know, where we naturally come together. And maybe further down, we don't have to just occupy the street, which I think we're doing really in really interesting ways, but maybe we can start to shape it down the line and give communities the authorship to be a little bit more idiosyncratic or the kinds of things that they really need. Next. And so I just wanted to show this because there were some really great things in here. And, you know, this is, there are a lot of great people that put this together. Salita Reynolds out at Los Angeles Department of Transportation. I think Evan Corey was there. He led the mobility playbook for Seattle, and now he's with Nelson Nygaard. But there's at least this understanding that the autonomous revolution will be humanized. That makes me feel really good as just, you know, a first start. Next. And, you know, it's the prioritization of pedestrians. And the only reason I put this, one reason I put this spread in here is because it starts to talk about, you know, maybe we can cross anywhere, or these mid-block, this notion of mid-block crossings. Now, this particular example looks like the primary or secondary arterial, but certainly when you get into the local non-arterials, it becomes even more craftier and I think a lot easier. And, you know, 20 is plenty. So we're already talking about lowering the speed limits. Next. But the other thing is you know, when you start doing the building environment, so you start to build buildings around community, there's a public realm there. And so, you know, at some point with the emergence of AV, we may start being able to stitch more robustly the building communities across streets and really create some really special moments for communities. Next. Before I go on, there's one thing that worries me a little bit, and that is, are we going to harass? Or are we going to relax? And there is a worry that with the technology coming on, that all of the stuff that used to guide us in cars and tell us where to go, when to stop, and who has the right of way, that could all come to the pedestrian environment, which is my nightmare. On the flip side, you know, you could look at the Metropolitan Improvement Districts, and Downtown Seattle Association has an ambassador program, you know, where you have, we're out there on the street, and why is that important? Well, you know, in some cases where we may have this new mobility, we can be out there to help guide things, and we can actually, you know, become part of that Detroit police force, but in a whole completely different way. I don't know if I would call it community policing. I would just say, in my 80s, I'd like to take a phone and sign up for an intersection and go down for the day and just hang out, talk to people, and make it a very soft type of city. And I think, you know, how do we think about things like that so that we don't bend to the whims of technology, but we start to craft it in a way that meets our needs and brings us together. Next. And so, you know, maybe all this stuff that went with us behind the steering wheel next will be changed when in some places the car doesn't need to see anything anymore. They're quiet and safe, and they don't smell. And this isn't a universal thing. This is just where can we create these first and last mile, and where can we take advantage of some of the transformations that we could capture. Next. And so, then we can focus on, quieter environments, lower light levels, places where kids can be out, the connection to nature, instead of going out in the street and getting hit with a load of cortisol because you got to move. Maybe it's a little bit, it's relaxing, and you're getting your serotonin, dopamine, and maybe some endorphins, and it's a whole different experience. Next. So let's get outside. That's all I'm going to say about that. Next. And it's been really great because all of our, we spent 90% of our time indoors. So we cared a lot about our health indoors. And so all of these protocols started to become established with LEED and WELL, and these are phenomenal. But we're also seeing them in the last 3-4 years start to move outdoors. And this is a great intersection of a lot of things happening at once. Minus the pandemic. It's something that was just put up on us. So I don't want to make that a good thing. Next. And so then maybe this is the first time that we might be able to change the whole orientation and relationship to the street or some streets. And I worked on the first Portland streetcar, and it was like, we can't put that in there. It's too big. It's too noisy. What is it? We did the same thing with swells. And this with the swell on Yell in Seattle, and we went over to Malmo and kicked the tires, and like, we can do this. And now, stormwater and clean water is not a thing anymore. We bid off parklets, which are awesome, but are there bigger things that we can do next? And so it becomes real interesting. Again, this is just visualizations help. This is not even a real project, but based on the stuff that we're doing with mixed use and everything, the right-of-ways are real. There's some dimensionality to it. We're playing around with that. But the interesting thing is that maybe we can create these places in mid-street where building communities can come together and work and live, and the kinds of community services that are around. And you know how busy intersections are and how great retail survives. Portland's a 200 by 200 foot block. So it's a very vibrant city in terms of the amount of intersections. But if we could bring that energy to a place other than an intersection, where there's a little bit more ability for these contingent relationships and the things that you need, it could be quite spectacular. Next. And so really what we're talking about is just connecting the cores, the vertical streets of buildings. And as soon as you start to do that, then all of the kinds of things that you need start to hang off of that, whether it's fitness, whether it's a pharmacy, whether it's a market or a grocery, whether it's a smaller business just trying to start up on a kiosk in a plaza. Next. And so, so what does it look like? Well, who knows? It's prioritizing people first and giving the community that kind of canvas to start with. If we don't have curbs and there's a safety aspect, then it's people of all abilities. Whether it's deaf design guidelines that fall into this, we've worked at Gallaudet, or people with certain disabilities that need the flat surfaces. So in multi-generational, that's great. We can certainly have room for more nature and cooler environments. And then the focus on human-powered mobility or walking, which I love the most because it's free. And it's nice to be able to walk out and not have to and just go. Next. And then finally, when you start thinking about connecting communities, you create a situation where you have a lot more of those third places you can be. And how great it would be as we come back to the cities. And I feel strongly that we'll be able to solve the equity problem there with affordable housing. And as we build more and densify both suburbs and cities, there will be more opportunities for us to interact more robustly. And in some respects, if I'm an apartment dweller and I'm running a business, why can't I go over to the office building and use those conference rooms? Or if a studio or a firm moves into an office building, maybe you get a residential access card to certain things, so that at the ground level there may be more shared amenities that will drive those investments and the kinds of things that will pop up around them, both in retail or starting businesses, and connected to our bigger transportation system. So these are just thoughts, just based on some experience of district planning. So I think that, Simon, is
well,
it might be it. But I will say that once we do the insides of buildings, I mean, I love Jane Jacobs and there's eyes on the street, but going to other conferences and talking with other folks, it depends on who you are. If eyes in the street means stewardship or surveillance. And so I think that's why it's so important to connect the building public realm more robustly, so that when things become more fair in our workplace and where we live, those will automatically be reflected and celebrated in the public realm that we all share.
Perfectly said. Maybe we leave it there. I mean, we have a couple minutes left. I don't know how we want to play it. We would, of course, love to continue the conversation with you all. So feel free to reach out to us individually or together, however you please. But I think we're obviously invested in anticipating or responding to changes of all kinds, and understanding how all parts of really our ground floor, the streets, parks, lobbies, can act together to do more. And not only that, but what is the relationship between a kind of human-centered approach and the technology that we have on hand, and what is the right balance between those things? So we're happy to have shared in this brief time period what we've been recently working on, and if there are any questions, maybe that's a place to start. What do you guys
We do
think?
have a couple. It's from the same person, but I think I'll just I was looking at it, and I'll just put out team. It says, do you find that in designing for equity, you have to consider extra measures for marginalized people to know that we're also welcome to stop and linger? I'm also curious about how these projects happen in conjunction, coordination with houselessness efforts. We have a quick growing population and house folks here on the West Coast, and there's some tension between opening up sidewalks and streets for activation, placemaking without displacing or demeaning people who don't have a place to sleep indoors.
I like to add something, not respond, because actually it's a very difficult response, but one thing that we are experimenting as of now is, the public spaces is the ideal location to reach out to marginalized population. For whatever reason, they are marginalized, either a choice, or losing homes, or mental problems. So what we found that now there is a more of an effort to use the public spaces to engage this population. For example, in this moment, we're working in Times Square with an organization that is called Fountain House. And so instead of trying to disperse, like many cities, they disperse or they try to remove or move in another location. But instead we are trying to create a place where, for example, visitors can interact with people experiencing homelessness, for example. So there is no better place than the public space to have this kind of interaction. So do you guys want to add anything else?
Sure. The design of space and being able to create more place on the streets sort of takes away that whole idea of a building frontage zone or some piece of the street belonging to a certain business, and is a little bit more shared, because that restrictive amount of room kind of creates a intentional movement. And then If someone is not moving along, but they're not patronizing a certain place, it leads to some concern and conflict. And so we've got to figure out a way to sort of dissolve that that mentality by offering more space just in general to the greater public in those third spaces, so you don't have to feel like, you know, you've camped out in somebody else's place. I'm seeing that up here in Seattle and West Seattle and California. I think the businesses have been fantastic in terms of accommodating and understanding the struggle.
Well, it seems like we have to go. This was super exciting, and I really hope that this is an ongoing conversation, obviously between the three of us and also anyone who has been a part of this. So thank you again.